This time we're finally talking about the long-awaited Xenns TPO SE. But before we get started, let me explain why this review took so long to come out. The simple reason is that the SE version never officially released in China. So despite all of you asking about it every day in the comment, I actually had to reach out to Xenns and borrow the unit myself just to make this review happen. Before this, most of gear I review was bought secondhand. I actually prefer it that way because that means manufacturer don't get say in what I can say or what I can't say in the review.
News doesn't work that way. You can't denounce us next week.
Anyway, let's start with the unboxing.
Yo, CeeLo killed this shit.
Looking at the graph, apart from some differences in the mid-range and upper treble, the two are almost identical. The SE still follows the GM1 preference bounds almost perfectly. Most of the analysis here is actually just the same as what I said in my original TPO review. But in case you haven't seen that video, I'll go through it again briefly. The 20 to 40 Hz sits above the preference bound. This is the sub-bass region. It gives the kick drums deeper extension and increases that sense of low frequency rumble and resonance. The main gain peak isn't centered at 3000 Hz. Instead, it is pushed slightly earlier. In theory, this brings the mid-range images closer to the listener and makes the vocal and instrument sounds larger and more intimate. However, the response flattens out to roughly 2,500 Hz rather than keeping the entire upper mid-range elevated. So just like the original T-Pro, these two choices partially counteract each other, which means the mid-range don't necessarily end up sounding as forward as the graph might suggest. Then there's a dip here, and the gain after the dip sits lower than the section before it. The purpose is fairly straightforward: reduce sibilance and soften sound of the metallic edge in the treble. Finally, there's an upper treble boost. This region mainly contributes to perceived ear overtones and a greater sense of openness in the presentation. In terms of subjective impression, the TPO SE shares almost exactly the same sound as the original T-Pro, and honestly, many of the description I used for the original T-Pro could be copied over and still applies here. That said, there are two major improvements. The first is that the background is noticeably blacker than on the original. It's kinda similar to the HCK NX8Ti. Imaging feels much cleaner and more clearly separated thanks to this character, because the notes emerge from a quieter background. The second improvement is that the mid-range timbre issue I mentioned in my previous review now has been largely addressed. The timbre simply sounds more natural now. I'll get into both of these points in more detail later. First, for the bass. It's very similar to the original T-Pro. Quantity is moderate, impact is very solid, with enough force behind each hit to feel satisfying. Extension is good, and bass note carries a very noticeable sense of decay and lingering resonance. The texture is also very well preserved, so bass lines sound complete and fully developed, making it very satisfying. Mid-range density sits in a sweet spot. Vocals are slightly intimate, positioned in a bit closer to the listener without being overly forward. The transition between the mids and upper mids and also the treble is handled very well. More importantly, that odd timbre I mentioned in the original T-Pro review is largely gone. The timbre now sounds more natural and straightforward. Nothing feels exaggerated or out of the place. Honestly, I think this is one of the most meaningful improvements in the T-Pro SE. The treble, much like the mid-range, leans slightly bright, and I don't mean slightly. Overall, it comes across as remarkably smooth, with just a faint hint of an ethereal shimmer to them. In some ways, I think one of the T-Pro SE's greatest strengths is how well it handles treble brightness and smoothness. It's just well controlled. It doesn't chase detail and ultra brightness. Instead, it managed to preserve plenty of information and resolution while keeping the treble feeling effortless, relaxed, and highly listenable. It's the kind of treble that stays present without demanding attention, which makes it very easy to listen to for long sessions without fatigue. Now, honest talk time. While the overall treble presentation is very smooth, it doesn't mean it's completely free of sharpness. with certain metallic instruments, especially cymbals where a lot of treble energy is concentrated. You can occasionally hear a slight rough edge and harshness during the trailing decade after the strike. It's like when the note fades away, you can sometimes introduce a faint sense of bite. And to be clear, this doesn't really change the overall character of the treble. The Tipo SE is still a very smooth sounding IEM, but if you're particularly treble sensitive, or if you spend a lot of time listening to genre like hardcore, fusion, or other recording with very prominent cymbal work, you may notice a slight metallic sharpness lurking in the background. As for the soundstage, the width isn't particularly large, just like the OG, but the depth is genuinely impressive. And because the background is much cleaner this time, similar to the NX8Ti, you get a very dark and very clean background behind the music. As a result, the depth layering becomes noticeably easier to distinguish. It's a bit like scuba diving. When the water becomes cleaner, you can suddenly make out all the details beneath the surface much more easily. That's the kind of effect that cleaner background has here. Overall, it's a soundstage with strong sense of depth and extension. It doesn't try to impress you with the sheer width. Instead, it creates a convincing sense of distance and layering. And honestly, the whole presentation reminds me a lot of listening to a live performance in a small live house venue. Not massive, not stadium size, but intimate and focused. Compared to other IEMs, well, there's actually one problem with this section. Generally speaking, after I buy an IEM, spending some time with it and finish the review, I usually just sell it. That way I can raise funds for the next one. You know how this topic goes. So, unfortunately, I can't just pull out both IEMs and give you a side-by-side comparison on camera this time, because I already sold my Mega7, Mega5, and also my Tipo original. But anyway, I think this circle of buying, selling, and trying some new gear is part of the fun of this habit. And the fun thing is that market itself can be surprisingly revealing. You can often tell whether something is genuinely well like it or not just by looking at its used value. Because, let's be honest, products that sound shite usually depreciate a lot faster. After all, the market isn't always right, but rarely always wrong. Compared to the original T-Pro, I'd recommend the T-Pro SE without hesitation. The areas it improves on are, in my opinion, absolutely crucial. The cleaner background alone makes the presentation feel more refined and better organized, while the improvement in the timbre addressed one of my biggest criticisms of the original. Those minor tweaks or subtle refinement, they are the kind of change that directly affect how convincing and natural the IEM sound. I'd go as far as saying that Tipo SE feels less like a special edition and more like a true Mark II. The Volume S is honestly one of those rare IEMs that feels like it's punching way above its price bracket. It's an incredibly versatile all-rounder. With low impedance modes, it already performs very well for the pop. The one thing I never really loved was the vocal timbre. It sounds a little dry. Compared to that, the Tipo SE delivers noticeably more natural and convincing vocal this time. With a high impedance mode, the Volume S becomes more composed and mature sounding. The presentation gains a bit more weight and stability, though the trade-off is that the treble can sound sharper. In that configuration, it actually works quite well for the classic music. From a versatility standpoint, I think the Volume S still has its own unique appeal. So rather than asking which one is objectively better, I think the more interesting question is, would you like to put all your budget into an IEM that excels in pop music, or a more versatile one? And about the NX8Ti, there are actually a few similarities between the two. For example, both have an impressively black background. That kind of clean backdrop makes it easier to pick out subtle detail that might otherwise get lost in the mix. That said, I think the biggest difference between them comes down to presentation and character. The NX8Ti feels more serious overall. It's like someone wearing a tailored suit and tie performing a classic recital with perfect composure. And the T-Pro SE, on the other hand, feels more lively and expressive. It's more like being at a live house show, where there's a strong sense of energy. Neither approach is inherently better, they are simply aiming for different experiences. The NX8Ti leans more toward elegance, refinement, and restraint, and the T-Pro SE feels more emotional and more fun. In Mega7, I think this is probably the comparison most of you have been waiting for. To me, the Mega7 is an exceptional, well-executed IEM. Whether we are talking about its price or its sound quality, it's simply impressive. The biggest difference between the Mega7 and the Tipo SE isn't technical performance, it's the tuning philosophy and what each IEM chooses to prioritize. The Mega7 is all about taking the V-shaped tuning into its absolute limit. You get incredibly impactful bass, along with the treble that's exceptional bright, airy, and transparent. Yet, somehow managed to avoid being scratchy. Mega7 definitely extends higher than the Tipo SE. The Tipo SE takes a very different approach. Instead of focusing on brightness and excitement, it focuses on smoothness. Its strength isn't that explosive wow factor that Mega7 delivers. It is the effortless and relaxed way it presents music. On top of that, Tipo SE also has a noticeably blacker background, which contributes to its sense of refinement and composure. So, if you are looking for something exciting, something energetic, something that constantly puts a smile on your face, Mega7. Or if you are looking for something smoother and more relaxed, Tipo SE.